So, for context, I, 28, female, have been married to my husband Sean, 28, for 2 years. Sean and I dated for 2 years before that, but we've known each other for several years since high school. We didn't start dating until a couple of years after college ended. I met him at a restaurant out of the blue. We exchanged numbers, went out on a few dates, and that's how we got here almost 4 years later. Before me, Sean was dating another girl from high school, Diane. She was a grade below us and had been with Sean since middle school. Him and I weren't exactly close, but we had a lot of common friends back in school, so I saw a lot of him and Diane together. After we graduated high school, I lost touch with him because he went to college in a different state and we didn't see much of each other during that time. When we finally did meet at that restaurant several years later, I ended up asking him about Diane and he told me that they'd broken up a year and a half ago. She'd been the one to dump him because she wanted different things from life and wanted a break to explore the world, but she'd come back to him someday, which just meant that she wanted to be single for a while and see other men without guilt, but wanted to keep Sean around as well as a backup option. So he stayed friends with her after the breakup, but minimized contact with her. By the time he met me, he'd moved on almost entirely from Diane, and I had also started seeing him in a new light because he'd grown a lot since I last met him in high school. Sean and I became friends very quickly and easily when we met 4 years ago, and we still share the same easy and laid back relationship even now. He says that that's something he never had with Diane, and she'd always tried to make him chase after her because she believed it made her more attractive. She'd flirt with other guys sometimes and go out with her friends all the time without bothering to speak to him for days, and would never bother to check up on how Sean felt about her behavior. He stayed with her because he was young and stupid, and also because he thought that he needed to make that relationship work, only because they had been together for so long. Another reason was his mother, who was a huge fan of Diane. Diane had met my mother-in-law, Sharon, 49, female, many times while they'd been together, and whenever Diane would visit, Sharon would praise her and act like a totally different person. And if I go by what Sean tells me, Diane used to do the same for Sharon as well, praising her incessantly and acting like a whole other person to impress her. They'd gossip and talk about other people, mostly Sean's other female friends, which he didn't like, and sometimes even Sean's aunts and cousins. Diane is also kind of conventionally beautiful, which meant that Sharon liked her even more. I don't understand why that's a thing, but it is what it is. Sean had told me that even after their breakup, Sharon had continued to invite Diane to family events and holiday dinners. He tried to talk to his mother and get her to stop inviting her, but she claimed that she really liked her, and even though they'd broken up, she and Diane were still friends, so she saw nothing wrong with having her over. They talked almost every other week and were actually good friends, so that continued even after I started dating Sean, and he introduced me to his family. I felt very weird about it in the beginning, and I still do. But there's a reason I'd been putting up with it for so long. The first time Sean brought me home to meet his family was for Christmas 4 years ago. We'd been dating for quite some time then, almost 8 months. Diane was also present there, and she was downright horrible to me the entire time. She was picking on my looks, my height, my outfit, my makeup, and whatnot. She was clever enough to make it all sound very humorous, like she was just joking. But Sean knew what she was trying to do and tried to stand up for me. But Sharon shut it down and directly asked me if I had a problem with Diane's jokes, putting me on the spot. I knew that if I said that I wasn't okay with it, they'd make it seem like I was insecure or something and put me down even more. So I decided to put on a strong front and said I don't care instead. It was petty of me, but as soon as I said it, I saw them look surprised and irritated, so I knew that I'd done the right thing. Once Sean and I came back home, he apologized to me for the way Sharon and Diane had behaved and told me that he'd make sure his mom didn't invite Diane anymore. But I'm the one who told him not to do that. I knew the kind of women they were, and I didn't want to lose to them, if you know what I mean. I didn't want them to believe that they'd intimidated me or made me feel insecure because they hadn't. And I felt like I had to prove it, so I explained it to Sean as well. He was surprised by my opinion on this, but he didn't interfere anymore after that day. And so far, every single family gathering that Sharon has hosted, Diane has been there, and every time they behave the same way with me. Snide remarks, backhanded compliments, or constant tries to bring up Diane's past with Sean even when there's no need to, just to make it awkward for me. I've faced it all with a brave face and have tried to remain as unfazed as I can. Sharon has even mentioned several times that Diane was the daughter-in-law that she would have preferred and would have been the better fit for Sean as a wife indirectly. It was annoying, but I tried to remain unfazed because as long as Sean was by my side, I didn't really care what they said. So Sharon and Diane could yap on forever and it wouldn't make a difference to me. That's how I've been dealing with this for the last 4 years. And I plan on having the same attitude for the next 4 years too. I wasn't going to be the first one to snap, and that was for sure. Now, coming to what actually happened and the incident that brought me here. So 3 days back, Sharon celebrated her 49th birthday. And every year she celebrates it with all her family and friends. This year, Sean didn't want to go and instead wanted to go to his co-worker's engagement party instead, which happened to be on the same day. He had valid reasons because his co-worker would only get engaged once and he was really close with him too. But Sharon forced him to promise that he'd attend her birthday party instead and wore him down after some days, so we decided to go to that party instead. Like every other event, Diane was invited too, and she dressed up to the nines for some reason. Even Sharon was overdressed, but at least it was her birthday that we were there to celebrate. Sean and I had decided that we were going to leave after Sharon cut the cake and then go to the engagement party. So at around 5:30 in the evening, my father-in-law brought out the cakes, and we were surprised to see 2 cakes because one of them said, "Happy almost anniversary." Sean and I didn't know what the other cake signified, and neither did anyone else, so we waited for the birthday girl to explain instead. Instead, it was Diane who took over the reins and, to our surprise, grabbed Sean by the arm and brought him to stand by her side. We were both too shocked to do anything because he was suddenly thrust into the spotlight and everyone was looking at him. Then Diane began to talk and explain that almost 10 years ago, on Sharon's birthday, Sean had gone down on one knee and given her a promise ring because they were both 18 at the time and were about to go off to different colleges within a few months. It had been 10 years since that day, and she was still sporting that ring on her finger, which she even proudly showed off to everyone present there. She then proceeded to give Sean an awkward hug that he didn't return, and Sharon cheered them on while talking about how this time she willingly let them steal her thunder so they could celebrate what could have been. The whole thing was so incredibly ridiculous that Sean and I just stood there silently with our mouths wide open, much like all the other guests. For a good few minutes, none of us said anything because we didn't know what could possibly be said in response to something this crazy. Diane continued to babble on jokingly about how Sean was her almost husband and Sharon was her almost mother-in-law, so this was their almost anniversary, as if we didn't understand what the joke was. And Sharon cut the so-called anniversary cake to feed it to Sean. She first fed it to Diane, and then she tried to feed it to Sean, but I guess he returned to his senses and backed away from his mother when she brought the slice of cake near his mouth. She looked surprised when he did that and asked him, "What's wrong?" When she asked that question, that's when all hell broke loose and Sean started shouting at her and Diane about what they'd done. He tore into them and finally let years and years of anger out at the party. He called them both shallow, stupid, and self-involved to the point of being delusional, and said that he was ashamed that he'd even been involved with Diane and was actually related by blood to Sharon because both of them were the trashiest women he'd ever had the misfortune to ever meet. I'll admit, even I was kind of taken aback by that outburst because Sean was usually a very chill guy and rarely ever yelled or got angry at people. It took a lot to push him to the edge, and Sharon had finally done it. With the help of Diane, of course. After Sean was done yelling at them, he stormed out of the party with me, and we took a cab to his co-worker's house instead. I tried to talk to him on the cab ride there, but he looked visibly upset and said that he didn't want to talk about his mother and his ex at that moment, so I dropped it then. Once we reached the other party, his mood seemed to improve as he met his friends and other co-workers, and I was relieved that he was looking better. That day, by the time we came back home, he was in a considerably better mood, and I had decided to bring up what happened at the party again because I thought that he'd want to talk about it then. He did not, and instead, I ended up getting an earful about how some of this was kind of my fault as well. When I brought up the incident at the party, he told me that he did agree that Sharon and Diane had tried to humiliate me with the cake, but I wasn't all innocent here either. I'd been the one who, for years now, had forced him to stay quiet and allow Sharon and Diane to behave however they pleased at these events because I felt like I had to prove to them that I didn't care. I'd made it all about myself and my need to show people how nonchalant I was, but I'd totally forgotten that Sean was just as involved here as I was, and this was getting on his nerves too. Sharon, Diane, and I were the ones battling it out with our mind games, but he was the one suffering and nobody bothered to check on him and how he felt about any of this. He didn't expect it from his mother or his ex, but he did expect it from me and said that I'd kind of let him down by putting my own feelings above his regarding this situation. That night, I argued with him and told him that he was being way too harsh and unfair to me, but now that I look back on it with a cooler head, I do think he had a point. AITA for forcing my husband to stay quiet for years while his mother invited his ex to family events to put me down? Update 1. Okay, so I apologized to Sean this evening. I read the comments, I did a lot of introspection, and I talked to a couple of my friends about this too and came to the conclusion that I was in the wrong here. And whatever he'd said that day was true. I had been putting my feelings above his own and was so busy acting like Diane and Sharon's behavior didn't bother me that I didn't even stop to think that maybe it bothered Sean. So for his sake, I should at least let him put an end to this if he wants to. I made him put his own feelings aside for years so that I could win some sick mind game with people who I didn't even like. And in doing so, I jeopardized the one relationship that matters the most to me. I screwed up badly, so I knew I had to compensate for it. Sean had been giving me the cold shoulder since the day of the party, and I also had been trying to act like it didn't affect me. It's a thing that I've always had, and it's been a problem forever because my response is to just always pretend that things don't bother me even when they do. I want to be perceived as nonchalant and unfazed by anything, so I act like that and bottle up my feelings, which I now realize is a really unhealthy coping mechanism. And I definitely need to work on this if I want my marriage to work. But today I skipped work and decided to go get him dinner from his favorite place instead, along with a chocolate cake that said, "I'm sorry" on it. I came home, set it all up, and made it as romantic as I could because I know he's a sucker for sappy rom-com apologies. Also because I was just very sorry about everything I put him through unwittingly. He came back home in the evening after work and was very surprised to see what I'd arranged for him, and he'd forgiven me within 15 minutes of his arrival. We had a teary reconciliation, and I ended up crying because I was so scared that I'd lose him over this when he wasn't speaking to me. We talked things out and everything's better between us now since I acknowledged my screw-up. I explained to him my constant need to be perceived as someone who's chill and laid back. Someone who's nonchalant, basically, for no reason other than it looks cool and I don't want to be vulnerable around people. That's the real reason behind this entire mess, and he understood and respected the way I acknowledged it and said that I'd work on it instead of just pushing it all down and bottling my feelings up. He also apologized for being rude to me, but I don't think he needed to do that. He did that because he's a good man and because he loves me, which really makes me think that I won in life. After we were done with dinner, we finally spoke about and addressed what had happened the other day with Diane and Sharon. I hadn't heard from either of them after the party, and after my fight with Sean, it had all been driven out of my mind anyway. However, Sharon had constantly been texting him to make him apologize to Diane, who was allegedly inconsolable and overcome with grief because of the way Sean had behaved with her. I had to try really hard not to roll my eyes when I was reading the text that Sharon had been sending my husband to guilt trip him into apologizing to that woman. Sharon was trying to make it seem like the cake and the whole almost anniversary gag was just that, a joke, and there was nothing that they were implying with it, but I call BS on it. This is a married guy that we're talking about here, and surely they'd have enough brains to realize how inappropriate and disrespectful this was to me. They went ahead with it because they wanted to humiliate me at the party, so they couldn't just write our feelings off saying it's just a joke and that Sean had taken things too far. The audacity to even suggest that Sean and I had taken it too far and had disrespected them with that outburst, and then our walkout, was just laughable. Sean had been ignoring her texts anyway. And today, after I saw those texts, we officially decided to go no contact with her. We'd had enough of her nonsense and wanted no part of this anymore. Update 2. 3 days ago, Sean and I blocked Sharon and Diane on all our social media, and he told his dad that he didn't want to speak to his mother anymore. His dad respected that because he understands Sean's feelings, but he also refuses to interfere now since he also loves his wife and knows that he can't leave her. So he's staying out of this completely like he has for the past couple of years. I'm not on board with my father-in-law's behavior, but I can't help it either. Everything was going well for the past 2 days, but today Sean suddenly called me out of the blue and said that he had to head to the hospital ASAP because apparently his mother had fallen from the top of the stairs and had fractured her leg. His maternal uncle had been the one to inform him, and he left as soon as he heard, as did I. We reached a hospital that his uncle had mentioned at around the same time, but before we could even enter, Sharon stopped us in our tracks, and she was completely fine. She and Diane had ambushed us in the parking area of the hospital and told us that this was the only way to get Sean's attention because he'd blocked them everywhere. My showing up was something they hadn't accounted for, but they just ignored me and went on talking with Sean completely normally as if they hadn't done anything wrong. Diane tried to explain to him that whatever she'd done at the party had been a prank and she didn't intend to offend him, while Sharon backed her up. Sean heard them out for a while and then told his mom and ex to F off right to their shocked faces and walked away once more with me. When we tried to get into our respective cars, Sharon started screaming at us, but we didn't wait around to hear her out. I'm sure she was cursing us out, but it didn't matter because she'd lied her way into seeing Sean again, and I couldn't imagine anything more manipulative than that. Sean went back home from the hospital because he was too stressed, but I had to go back to work. While I was at work, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize, and it happened to be Sean's mother. She screamed at me for 15 whole seconds before I managed to disconnect the call. I'd just been caught off guard while working, or else I wouldn't even have answered the call, but she was screaming at me. All I heard was selective swear words at the highest volume. I don't know why she was mad at me because I didn't have anything to do with Sean's behavior. She'd pushed her own son to that extent, not me. Anyway, I blocked her and tried to get on with my day, and finally, when I got back home around 6, I got to speak to Sean. He told me that he'd also blocked the rest of his relatives who were close to his mother, along with his uncle now, because it was clear that she'd go to any lengths to get him to forgive them and talk. That's all we can do right now, because it's not like they're threatening us in any way, and neither are they consistently stalking us or whatever. So a restraining order is out of the question anyway. Sean has talked to his dad and told him about what happened today, but he still refuses to intervene. It's his choice, and Sean loves his dad, so I'm not saying anything right now, but I don't think the way my father-in-law is acting is a great example of being a good father either. The least he can do is at least talk to his wife and stand up for his son. But he refuses to do even that. Sean loves his father, but the man has never once stood up for him when it comes to Sharon. And I've only kept my mouth shut out of respect for their relationship. Or else I'd have a lot to say about how his entire family is just ridiculously stupid people who literally never think of anything except themselves. How a man like Sean is a part of a family like this, I'll never understand. Update 3. Hey everyone. So it's been a week since the last update, and yesterday we decided to file for a restraining order against Sharon and Diane because of something they did to me, or at least tried to do, to be more precise. So I was coming back from work the other day, like 3 days back, and it was a Thursday that day. On Thursdays, I usually stop at a coffee shop near my office and get myself a frappuccino as a little treat. Last Thursday, I was about to do the same, but as soon as I entered the shop, Diane and Sharon left their seats where they'd been waiting for me and came right at me with their coffees. Before I could even react, both of them had splashed me in the face with it. And then Diane even grabbed some of the whipped cream from her cup and dumped it into my hair. I was stunned and just sort of froze on the spot for a while before the baristas rushed to help me clean up a little. They tried their best and made sure to get it all off, so a huge shout out to them for literally abandoning their jobs to help me, and even the other customers who waited patiently while I tried to wipe it all off. My clothes were all sticky and gross, and my hair was disgusting, but I was a lot cleaner by the time I was done. Some of the other customers made sure I was all right, and one asked me if I wanted to call a cop, which I did, and reported Diane and Sharon. I pressed charges against them, but they got off with nothing more than a slap on the wrist and a fine because this was just a misdemeanor and hadn't actually harmed me. Unless you're talking about my clothes from that day, which I can't wear to work again because of the faded brown coffee stains all over the front. Nevertheless, we did press charges, and that went on their record, so that'll help with the case. Sean wanted to take this public and post about this on social media so that more and more people would know and stay away from Diane, and also his mom, but changed his mind when he realized I just wanted to move on from this without any more discussion. Honestly, that incident kind of shook me up, and it sounds silly, I know, but it did make me think that if things were worse, then it could have easily been something more than just them throwing coffee at my face. They could have seriously hurt me if they wanted to because they knew my routine from my social media and they knew my address. So this could have gone south easily. Sean and I have had a decent financial year, so we'd already been considering moving, and now, after what happened, we definitely will be moving. We'd also been thinking about having babies, and we're going to start trying soon enough. But my in-laws won't ever get to meet my kids. We've cut off my father-in-law as well after he refused to intervene, even after the coffee incident. Sean got into a big fight with him and then cut him off as well. I, for one, am relieved that I won't be seeing or hearing from these people ever again now. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.